is what it is. So he's ruling there for about 19 years, and then it continues on another 4 quick kings for about another 20, 25 years. That's when he is coming on the scene. He's coming on the scene about 40, 50 years
So
before.
he came to the north
He's
first.
coming on the scene about 40, 50 years before the destruction of the temple. And what is his goal? He goes up north and he says to the Jews who are living up north, it's the time to return. He even speaks to the Jews, I believe, who are outside of Israel, who are in Assyria, and what does he say to those Jews? Come back home. He has like a double message. Come back home, and after you come back home to the north, what else? Let those in the north unite with the kingdom in the south. He is, and this is what makes him stand out, he is the prophet. He is a great prophet that tries to bring together the Jewish people. And his voice rings clear in contemporary times. I spoke to my daughter today, Ilana, who lives in Efrat. Just a mile from her today, in Alon Shvut, there was a young woman from Tekoa, which is very, very close to Efrat. The car goes into a group, I think they were waiting for a bus, and whoever is in the car jumps out, it's a terrorist, and stabs this poor woman and murders her. And for those who think that it's limited to Alon Shvut, it happened in Tel Aviv, where the attack was against the soldier. And we are surrounded on all sides. I called my grandson, two of our grandsons are in the Army. One is in the Air Force doing very important work, and the other one is in a fighting infantry unit. Tomorrow, it's the 11th of the month. He has 3 more months left. We used to wait. We couldn't wait until he got in. Now I can't wait, frankly, until he gets out. He's done his 3 years almost, and I warn him that the most dangerous part of the journey is the last few blocks. So he's got to keep his guard up. But he's very busy. He's very busy. Often he doesn't take my call. Often he doesn't have a phone. At this time, he saw I've been calling him every day. He's not answered. He answered, and he said, Rabbi Avi, that means grandfather Avi, I've never been so busy. I said, God bless you. I'll call you back. I got you your van, because he wants to go traveling when he's through, and he needed a van for his buddies. We got him a van. So he seemed happy, but he's going back to work. Who knows what the bleep he's doing? Who knows? He's busy. He's busy. There's all kinds of stuff that's going on, and these are young men whose lives are on the line. That's why I appreciate what you said about Saturday night. It was a very sweet night, but truly, I'm uncomfortable with, I know it came from a good place. For me, truly, the heroes about whom movies should be made, these young men, these young women, these are the heroes of our people who are putting their lives on the line constantly. I do believe, as it relates to Israel today, that we face serious physical challenges. I'm very confident that we're going to overcome. We'll have to pay a price. We paid a price this past summer. 65 fell. We face a physical challenge. We face a spiritual challenge. We want to make sure that the young people in Israel understand not only the importance of fighting for Israel, but why they're fighting for Israel, why Israel is a unique Jewish state and all of that. But the most serious problem that we face is the Jeremiah issue. I believe we will not be overcome by the physical challenges and even the spiritual challenges that are daunting. What could really hurt us if we are so divided amongst ourselves that we can't get along? The religious, the Haredim, the religious Zionists, and the people who don't believe in God and whatever, if there is no sense of togetherness between the people, and it doesn't mean that they're going to grieve. If they're not going to, as Begin used to say, if we're not going to agree to disagree agreeably, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. So the message of Jeremiah for me, as one who really sees this as the challenge facing our people, the message of Jeremiah is alive and well. He might as well be living this very, very day. And the chapter that talks about his call for synthesis is chapter 3, which we've already studied. And today we're studying chapter 31, which is a very important chapter, which is, by the way, very misunderstood. And I'll tell you why it's misunderstood. It's misunderstood because most think it's Jeremiah speaking to the south, when in fact, Jeremiah partially speaks to the south, but his primary message is what I've been talking about. His primary message is to the north. He's turning to the north, to the Jews who are living up north, to the Jews who've been exiled into Assyria. He says, now is the time to come home. So let's take a look now at chapter 31 of Jeremiah.
This is what the kids
This
are
is
singing.
on page 1086, 1086, and I'm going to begin reading. It's so powerful. I read in the Hebrew and will always be translating, but for those who can't get the Hebrew, please excuse me that I read it in the Hebrew. The rhythm of the language is so beautiful. It resonates for me, very, very powerful, and it's like a song. This, by the way, most of what I'm about ready to read is read. We always read a prophetic portion on a Shabbat or on a holiday morning. This is actually read on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. On the second day of Rosh Hashanah, we read this portion. The most famous sentence in this portion, you can see it if you'll turn to page 1088, the bottom, Habein Yakir Li Ephraim. It's so famous that people think that it comes from the liturgy. No, the liturgy took it from the prophet. Habein Yakir Li Ephraim. But let's see the surroundings of that sentence. Back to page 1086. Jeremiah is speaking. Ko Amar Adonai. Thus says the Lord. That already speaks volumes, because the Jewish prophet doesn't speak in first person. The Jewish prophet doesn't say, this is what I say. The Jewish prophet is always speaking in the name of the other. The other is uppercase, in the name of God. Ko Amar Adonai, thus says the Lord. Matzah chen bamidbar, am siride chorev. To translate it, I think line 2 and line 3 should be, well, actually, I was going to say it should be turned around, but the English translation has done my work for me. The English translation actually has, the English translation, Saul, over here, has translated line 3 before line 2, which in the English, that's the proper translation. The people escaped from the sword. Am siride chorev, chorev from the word chorev, sword. Matzachen bamidbar, found favor in the wilderness. Now, when you look at that, well, who escaped from the sword? So when you look at it at first blush, one would think Jeremiah basically is not living during the period of the northern kingdom. He's living in the period of the southern kingdom. So perhaps he's speaking to those who escaped the sword of the Babylonians. He's speaking to the south. But the simple interpretation is no. He is not speaking to the people of the south. He's rather speaking to the north, because when Assyria came in, they also came in by sword. And he is speaking to the people who escaped the sword, those who survived the Assyrian onslaught and remained alive. He's talking to the Jews who still remain in the north. He's probably also talking, as I've said before, to those Jews who were exiled. Am sridei chorev, the people escaped from the sword. Matzachen bamidbar, they found favor in the wilderness. It's not as if there's a wilderness up north, the Negev is down south, but this should be understood metaphorically. they found favor in the wilderness because they were in a kind of wilderness because we were not sovereign up north. They were basically subjects to a foreign rule, and then he says, Holoch lehargio Yisrael. Lehargio, from the word lahargia. What is lahargia in modern Hebrew? Halzechaim. Chatnisht. Es wird auspressen. Calm down. In Israel, targia et atzmercha. Right? You know in Israel, you know what they say in Israel? There are no straight lines in Israel. Ever try to get on a Neged bus in Israel? The lines are all circles. Yeah, and people said people
they're pushing,
love
no
Israel.
matter
Always
when they are, they're pushing.
Targia, little, stay calm. That's what it means. Hargia, I think hargia is from the word rega. What is the word rega? A minute, take it easy. Halzechaim, like, you know, in Israel when they go like this. You know, wait, calm down, take a cold shower. Holoch lehargia Yisrael, not Yehuda. He's speaking to Israel, that the people who escaped the sword, who have been in the wilderness, you are coming to Israel, you are coming to experience tranquility. This is your moment. This is the moment that Israel will be at peace. And as I said to you before, he especially sees this moment as being opportune because Assyria is having its problems with Babylonia, so he basically says, come home. This is the moment of return. Thus says Yirmiyahu, and he says it in the name of God. Yes, Jessica?
When we're starting Lamed Aleph, it's second sentence. And before that is Aleph. You see?
Yes, I do.
And it's Ba'etahi Ehyeh Elohim L'chol Mishpachot Yisrael.
Well, you see, Jessica said something beautiful that I have not said, and I've seen it, but I didn't notice it tonight, and Jessica gets all the credit. It's interesting that there's this big Lamed Aleph, but if you look, it is sentence 2, as you said, Yiska. Sentence 1 is up there. Ba'et hahi ne'um Adonai. In that time, says the Lord, I will be, Lelohim, I will be, declares the Lord, I will be a God to whom? L'chol mishpachot Yisrael. Wow. To all of the families of Israel. First of all, I love that expression, mishpachot Yisrael. I'm giving sessions now on creating community. And one of my points is, and I take this from the Bayit, I don't like, the term community is, you create a community. I don't like the term community. For me, the goal of a synagogue is not to create a community, it's to create a family. Very big difference between the model being a model of community and the model being a family. We can spend many hours on this. What it comes down to, though, if the model is a family, I think the commitment that people in a family have to each other is on a very different level than the commitment that people have in communities. It's a closeness. I think the boundaries are more frayed.
Yeah.
I think when you say family, by definition, it's a bit larger. Community is more, it's sort of included in a particular domain. So for me, I look at the Bayit, for example, as a family. If it's a family, then there are less boundaries between each other, less boundaries between its leader, I'm a spiritual leader, and the people. If it's a family, I view myself, not so much, I view myself as a rabbi, but more than a rabbi, I view myself as a leader within the family. It's a different relationship. That's why I don't sit in front of the shul. I'm a member of the family, I'm part of the family. I'm sitting here, I'd rather sit there because it's easier for me to be here. B'tochami, correct. We started the whole philosophy of rabbi off the bima. And when we started this 30, 40 years ago, people made fun. I'm very happy to say that I recently saw an article that said, Rabbi off the bima. And it's really picked up. And people ask me, how come I don't sit in front of the shul? My response is, that's not where the Jews are. I want to be where the Jews are. Who sits up there? Who wants to be up there? I don't want to be up there. I want to move around. I mean,
everybody looking at you.
I think the toughest thing I'm gonna have to deal with when I step back July 1st is Toby says, are you gonna be flitting around the shul anymore, or what's gonna happen? So I don't know, I gotta, maybe this will be one condition I'll deal with Stephen, maybe he'll allow me to jump around the shul, I don't know what.
He can't
I
stop.
love this expression, Mishpachot Israel. We have the expression in the Psalms of Mishpachot Amim, family of nations. There's an inner family, then there's the family of Israel, then there's the family of nations. But you're right, Jessica. He's speaking to the family of Israel, Behemo Yihiyuli La'am, and they, the whole entity, will be my people. The Hebrew word for nation is Am. Rabbi Soloveitchik used to say, if you vowelize Am, if you vocalize it, you can put in, rather than a comment, put in a chirik, in. What does in mean? With an ayin. With an ayin it means with. With an aleph it's if. With an ayin it means with. The nation means one is with the other. And so he speaks to the north and says, come home. Sentence 2. You could spend hours on the next sentence. As I read it, I get the chills. You'll see this is a magnificent sentence. Yes, Charlie?
I don't understand what come home means. Come home to Judah? That
Yes.
seems to be the only organized Jewish community left.
It mean, right, that's the only place we're sovereign, but it could mean, I think, even more broadly, come home, let's create our home. Because in the end, he is speaking to the north, but he's also going to be speaking to the south. The north should come to the south, but the south has to accept the north. The great tragedy of the destruction of the northern kingdom is that just a few years before the destruction, this pains me to say this, but the north and the south had different allies, and they were in war with each other. And the Book of Kings records, Malachim Bet records, that thousands of Jews were killed, killing each other. That's right then. Right then. I mean, when Chizkiyahu was a great king, he was the king of Judah as the north was being exiled, but he was pretty docile as the north was being destroyed. And I often wondered, why didn't he intervene? Why didn't he do something about it? Now, some argue he couldn't because he felt that he would be in jeopardy because Assyria would have taken care of him. It's interesting. He doesn't intervene because maybe he's concerned about what Assyria would do to him. But in the end, the same Assyria that exiles the north threatens the south. You think you're at peace because they'll take the hit from Assyria, and I'm at peace. In the end, the Assyrians went after Chizkiyahu, and that's the book of Isaiah, Yeshayahu. Let's look at sentence 2.
They defended themselves.
Well, what happened was that they were miraculously saved. More than defended themselves. It was a miracle that Ashur was called up. They had other political issues that they had to attend to. Look at the second sentence. Me'rachok Adonai nir'ah li. The Lord revealed himself. This translation is to me of old. I love the JPS, but I'm 70 already. I could disagree. I think it means, what does rachok mean?
Far.
Far. The Lord appeared to me from a distance. I want to read further. These 3 words are the words I put on a ring that I gave to my holy wife. Ve'ahavat olam avtich. My love for you is an eternal love. Al kain mishach tich chosed. Translation, therefore I continue my grace to you. Al kain, therefore, mishach tich literally means I pull you with kindness. So I want to say a few things about these 3 lines of Me'rachok Adonai nir'ah li V'avat olam avtich. We're talking about the poetry of a prophet. This is not narrative. This is poetry. Poetry has to be understood as such. So let me throw this out. If we're thinking about feeling the presence of God, one would imagine, when does one feel the presence of God most?
something good happens.
When
When something
When something
good.
bad happens.
What, okay, now we have two interpretations.
When we pray.
Rebbe says when something good happens, when something good happens. So where is God when something good happens? God is
There.
God is there. God is near. God is near. You feel that presence of God. Now we have an interesting interpretation that says, I feel the presence of God.
When I pray. You know, we're
Not
gonna,
necessarily.
Okay, well, but okay, when I pray, that's true. But
Yeah.
what is he saying? What
People
is the
just
prophet
pray and-
saying?
Just don't feel anything.
Estelle, the
Well, I
prophet
do.
is saying what you're saying, Estelle. The Lord appeared to me from a distant, from afar.
When a bad thing happens.
Correct. We are in a word which is constantly used in Torah is the word covenant. You've heard me use this ad nauseum. Covenant is a contract. Contract is a contract between two people. Covenant is a contract between people and God. It's a covenant. Now, when the 10 tribes certainly were exiled, at that point, what seems to happen in the covenant? There's a break. There's a fracture. There's a fracture between God and the people. Certainly when the temple is destroyed, it's broken. And we've been exiled. Now the prophet says that this is the challenge. The challenge is that even when the fracture takes place, even when the split takes place, the prophet is saying, God is still with me. Meirachok Adonai nir ali. That's the great challenge of a covenant.
People who
Covenant is
disagree.
easy when God is close. But can you see and feel God in the places where you least suspect God will be? I want to spend a little bit more time on
People
that.
would disagree.
Yeah, people would disagree, and I respect, by the way, people would say, Avi, I appreciate it, but that's not been my life experience. My life experience is I've survived the Shoah and to hell with God. There are people who say that. It was the great Eliezer Berkowitz who in his introduction to faith after the Holocaust, it's must reading. He's a very, very brilliant thinker, and we'll be doing some of his readings in our Tuesday mornings class where we're studying Sefer Shemot, Exodus as being the roots and the seeds of anti-Semitism. He argues that, this is his definition, anyone who has been victimized by anti-Semitism, and he's specifically talking about by Nazi Reich anti-Semitism, he says that person is holy. The mere fact that one has been victimized because one has been a Jew, even if I've not identified myself as a Jew. I may not identify myself as a Jew, but in the Third Reich, you couldn't run from it. You couldn't run from it because even if we didn't identify, they identified us. They had their own understanding of who was a Jew. They had their own understanding. They had one grandparent or whatever it was. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, I say this tongue in cheek. He was some outreach worker. Italy Mashma was Israel. He brought a lot of Jews back because even if you wanted to run from it, you were a Jew. That was it. So he writes, if because you're a Jew, you've been victimized, that makes you holy. That's his first comment. Then his second comment is, and therefore, if a person was put to death, and at the last moment of her or his life, that person says, God, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Berkowitz says that person has died a holy believer.
Kiddush Hashem.
A holy believer. But then he says that if a person is put to death, also because he's a Jew or she's a Jew, but that person at the last moment says, where are you, God? Bleep you, God. There is no God. How could God allow this to happen? He radically, brilliantly, and beautifully says, that person is no less holy. That person is just as holy. That person is a holy disbeliever. We have holy believers and we have holy disbelievers. So I'm just saying, I'm responding to your comment because I think you're right. I think that I understand fully as a rabbi, as a person, someone who we're blessed with 3 children. You know, we had a 4th child, an infant child who died very young. I struggled in those days. For 3 months I didn't put on tefillin. It was a very hard time for me. By the way, that made my rabbit. It gave me, my understanding of the holiness of every person, of listening to the angst and the pain of people, whatever they believe, I think emerged from that. Because I understood what it means when you're faced with a challenge and you're struggling with faith. I understand that. That's why my concept of family is, I don't, come, I don't care what you believe, what you don't believe, just come, let's give each other a hug and let's experience whatever we're experiencing together. But the prophet is saying, though, that the challenge of covenant is, can I, notwithstanding the distance from God, can I still feel His presence? That's a great challenge. Can I'll say it in the most extreme form, can I, in the ghettos of Europe during World War II, in the camps, can I see God in the camps? Can I see God in the camps? The Elie Wiesel story from Night, about that little boy, do you remember? He was so light that he was dangling, and he doesn't die right away on the gallows. And the last line goes something like, oh, there, God is hanging on the gallows. I always understood that to mean God is hanging on the gallows. But from what I'm saying now is, can you see God even at that? I'm saying something very, very radical, very, not so much radical, something, it's hard. It's merachok Adonai nireli. Let me say it a different way. I think sometimes you can sense, you can get an assessment of what's happening, not from being close, but from being far. If I am reading this Tanakh and I hold the book this way, I can't read the words. Sometimes I can only see it from a distance. Sometimes I can only see it from a distance. I can only see it in hindsight. That's what the Bible means when God says to Moses, I want to see your face. God says, you can't see my face. I'll pass you by. From the back you may get a glimpse. In hindsight you may get a glimpse of what is happening. Right? This young man, Danny's sister, a wonderful young woman, Roberta, and her husband Chuck, lived in Israel. Were traveling from the south in Eilat. The yurtzeit was just recently, with a daughter in the car. That was it. It was a terrible, terrible car accident. Very grateful to Roberta. I recall a memory. When we started the adult education program at the shul, I was advertising like crazy. And I advertised that I was going to teach Ramban. And I came and I was looking for a lot of people, like a group tonight. Only one person showed up, Roberta. And I always say to my students, it gets most difficult when one person shows up. When no one shows up, you can say what you want to say. One person shows up, what are you going to do?
Each person is a world.
That's true. Each person is a world. I know that, but it's still difficult. It's still difficult. Can you feel God's presence? From a distance, sometimes you can. And so, whenever you're reading Jeremiah, who's the speaker? Merachok Adonai nirali. I believe that this is what Israel is saying. In sentence 1, Jeremiah calls out, thus says the Lord. The people who survived the sword are finding favor in the wilderness. They are going to find tranquility. Now the people of Israel speak, and they say, the Lord appeared to me from a distance. We're not sovereign. God is not close. But Baruch Kvod Adonai Nimkomo. I still feel the blessedness of God from His place, even though I am very far from that place. Why? Because, and this is God's response, because v'avat olam avdich. Because God's love for Israel is an eternal love. Avat olam avtich. Avtich means my love for you, avat olam, is an eternal love. What is the test of love? The test of love is not how we're getting along when everything is going great. The test of love is not how we're getting along if you're with me when we want to be intimate with each other. The test of love is how we're getting along when things are not so great. How we're getting along when we're distant from each other. So what Jeremiah says, the North is saying, even from a distance, I'm struggling to feel that presence of God. And I'm feeling that presence of God because I hear God's calling, that God's love for me is an eternal love. Al kain b'shachtich chesed. Therefore, God is speaking. You can see my is uppercase, it's capital. Therefore, I continue my grace to you. I continue my grace to you because my love for you is eternal. And even though we're distant from each other, I still love you. You still struggle to feel my presence. Yes, Michael?
Oh, I was just going to say to complete whether God is here when things are going badly or well. I think He is also there when we least expect it. I'm thinking of that passage, and I can't think quite where it is. I didn't know God was in this place. I think it was before the struggle with the angel. Perhaps.
Yes.
No.
It's when
Yaakov.
Yaakov wakes up
Yaakov,
from
yes.
this
Mhm.
from the dream of the ladder.
Yeah.
So
So
Chain Yesh Hashem, there is the Lord in this place. I tell you, it's if one has this belief, it could be very comforting. That's for sure. Yes, Arnie.
I was actually thinking of a different part. Of the Torah when Amalek is mentioned, there's really not that much descriptive material. And it says they attacked stragglers, and I forget how else the people, the Jews that they attacked were described. But I don't remember where I read this, but somebody said that it wasn't just the stragglers, it was the people who were despondent, maybe the disabled, the people who were sick. Not only that, but even the disbelievers, the people who had fallen behind, they weren't sure, and so God protected them.
Mm-hmm.
That had a profound influence on my understanding of God.
And right, I think that's wonderful. I mean, it gets heavy because there are times we practically don't feel we've been protected. Something terrible happens, and these are all theodicy type questions. Yes, Milton, and then Estelle.
Does Yirmiyahu really...
By the way, I go back with Milton. Tell everybody the first time we studied together.
First time we studied together was in the class of about 25 kids when I was a freshman in high school.
Goes back how many years?
46 years.
Great student.
And Rav Weiss was almost got a smicha, and he was the best teacher we ever had.
Wow. Thank you.
True, it's true, because he's the first teacher, then I'll ask my question. He was the first teacher who taught, I've been in yeshiva day school since I'm in preschool, and he's the first teacher that taught all of us what I call globally. In other words, he just didn't focus on why is there an extra yud or an extra vav, but when we studied Tehillim, it was also how it relates to everyday life and the global. So, and I say, the rabbi knows to this day, every time I fly and I think about the heavens and Tehillim, so that was a very, my question
Yes.
is Yirmiyahu saying with interpretation that God is far, he sees God merachok? Could it also be that he feels distant from God?
Mhm.
Flipping it around?
Yeah, I think that could be true as well. That he himself says that if my people are distant, I'm distant, and yet he could be reflecting that although there is a distance, I feel that presence. But yes, Estelle.
Not going back as far as Milton, of course, when you mention the word holy, if a person is good or sees something and sees God from near and everything is holy, and then you're saying victims who are in various situations are also holy. I'm questioning, what is holy? And where does God come into this altogether?
That's a great question. Exactly what is holy? It's a good question. I'll take a stab at it. It's not where I want to go now, but Martin Buber talks about holiness as bringing God into whatever we're talking about. Desecration is pushing God out. That's Buber's concept. I would say that holiness is not only bringing God, but what God represents. And what God represents is ethical monotheism. Holiness is leading a life of righteousness and justice. That's what the Torah is about. And I think in Judaism it's unique. I mean, if it's just that, if it's so generic, then how are we different than other faith communities and so on? We're distinct. There's a lot that we share with others, but there are distinctions. But in what is holiness? Holiness is bringing God and bringing God's teachings of the Shamru Derech Hashem, follow the paths of the Lord, Lasot Tzedakah Mishpat, into our lives. Let's take sentence 3. Sentence 3.
We're already on sentence 3.
We're doing very well now. Od evnech v'nivneit b'tulat Yisrael. Now God is speaking again to the north. Od. First, I love that word od. I love that word od. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. The people of Israel live. And then what's the next words? Od Avinu Chai. What does od mean? Still. The word od. As I get older, as I get older, not just old. As I get older, I like simple. I like simple words, little words. Od. Od means still. I understand ode to mean against all odds. Against all odds. Against everything that's logical. You find ode when Joseph reveals himself to his brothers after 22 years of separation.
Od Avichai.
He says to his brothers, Ani Yosef, I am Joseph. Ha'od Avichai. Is Tata's father still alive? My God, after all of this, after all he endured, is he still alive? Now you can turn that on Joseph's heel if you were so worried. Why don't you send a little postcard to your father? I'm not going there saying, but after all he's been through, Ha'od Avichai.
Couldn't pick up the
So
phone.
Shlomo, who's your excited is this week, he's saying, Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel live. Od Avinu Chai. That was the Soviet Jewry groups. You would think after all those years of communism that there would be nothing less, no Jewish vestige, nothing left. Yet against all odds, Od Avinu Chai. Here the north had been exiled. And so, what does the prophet say? Od Evnech. Od, whenever you find Od, which means still against all odds, God says, Evnech, I will help you build, from the word bana. V'nivnet. I love that word, Even, Evnech. Evnech means to build, right? Bana. Bana means to build, right? Now, Evnech also is a play on the word Even. What does Even mean?
Stone.
Iron, stone, because you build with stones. But when you look at the word Even, it's also a composite of two words. Even is a composite of Av and Ben. Av and Ben. Father and son. It could be mother and daughter, father and daughter, mother and son. It's Jeremiah saying, Evnech is a word that speaks to the link between God and his people. Od Evnech. Our relation, first it literally means, Od Evnech, I will still build v'nivneit, and you will be built. The JPS, I will build you firmly again. The reason you have this translation is because you have the double word Evnech v'nivneit, which always means, a lot. I will surely, a lot you will be built. But literally means against all odds, Evnech, I will help you build, v'nivneit, and you will be built. But it's not just a physical building. It's a spiritual structuring of the relationship between God and his people. Bitulat Yisrael, O maiden of Israel. Now, he says, O maiden of Israel. Who is he talking to? He's talking to the north. And he's saying Bitulat. Bitulah is actually a term which literally means virgin. He's saying, my love for you is the love of youthfulness. It's a love of first time. Even though we've been together for a long time, we've had a great falling out. This is the poetry of Jeremiah. And then he says, when we come together, we're going to have a great chasana. Boy, are we going to dance. He's not just talking about, in the first sentence he says, there's going to be tranquility for you. In the next sentence he says, you're going to return. You're going to return because from a distance you feel my love. In the third sentence he says, and when you return, we're going to unite. And then he says, Od Tadi Tupayich. First of all, Tadi, it's clearly a play on the word ad. Literally, again you shall take up your trembles. Od Tadi, I love that. Od, say that. Od, then Tadi. Drop the tough. The tough. The tough just, gives it its proper tense, but it's the ayin dalid. Od Tadi Tupayich. I think that's a tupayich. I can't see the.
Yes.
Let me just see.
It is.
It's a tupayich. That's the word tof. What is a tof?
Drum.
Timbrels, bongos. Oh, tadi tupayich. You'll take up the trembles. V'yatzat bimchol b'sachakim. And what is bimchol? Bimchol. It's a play on when Miriam went dancing with the timbrels after they crossed the sea. V'tetzei kol hanashim achareha bitupim uvimcholot. They went out with the timbrels. Uvimcholot. Bimcholot is with the dances. V'yatzat bimchol mesachakim. What does mesachakim mean?
Happy, dancing.
Schok. What does schok mean?
Laughter.
Joyous,
Joyous.
laughter.
Joyous, yeah.
There'll be timbrels. There'll be music. It's going to be a happy, joyous moment. We're not going to return with our heads down, but there'll be song, there'll be shira, there'll be tupim and cholot. And then he continues, Od tit'ich ramim. Od, again, another od, against all odd. You will plant vineyards. Now you have, taking it a little bit further, you'll succeed. And we were not an industrial society. It's not like you opened up, a Google thing or, No, you're going to plant the vineyards. Beharei Shomron. What is that? In the hills of where? Not in the hills of Judah. You're going to do it in the north. Natu, notim. You will plant plantings. V'chilelu. There's a lot of discussion of that word chilelu. Translation here is men shall plant and live to enjoy them. First of all, it doesn't say men. It says people. Natu notim. The planters will plant. V'chilelu. Chilelu chalal. First, you can understand a lot of different. You can understand chalil, the flute, but you can also understand chilelu. Chilelu is a word for redemption. There is the way many commentators understand this to be valachav neta rivai. Neta rivai means for the first 3 years that you plant the plant, you're not supposed to use it for yourself. In the 4th year, you can use it on what condition? It's got to be eaten. The produce has to be eaten in Jerusalem. Or you sell it, and the money that you sell it for must be used in Jerusalem. Or if you're using it in Jerusalem, where are you going? You're going down south, bringing them together. V'nat'u not in v'chilelu. If you say this, by the way, it means that the people have been there for a period of time. They've been there at least 4 years. 3 years they can't touch it, they planted it. And the 4th year they're redeeming it. And then it concludes this paragraph, Ki yesh yom, for the day is coming. I love this. Can you feel the power? Now he's sort of concluding it. He's saying you're coming home, and with song and dance and vineyards. I read this, Jeremiah is talking about when? He's talking about the Exodus ship. He's talking about your husband. He's talking about that dream of coming home. This Ben Gurion, this is the stuff he used to quote. The return, the coming together. Ki yesh yom, because the day is coming. Koru notzrim bahar Ephraim. You know what a notzer is? Notzer literally means a watchman. Notzer means to watch. There'll be watchmen in the mountains of Ephraim. Where are the mountains of Ephraim? Saul, where are they? North. Ephraim is the north. Benjamin is the south. The watchmen will be in the north. And they will cry out, Kumu v'na'ale Zion. Rise. Let us go up to Zion. El Adonai Eloheinu. This is the call in modern times of Herzl. It's the call of Begin. It's the call of Ben Gurion. That was the call. Frankly, I'm not sure they said, let's go up to the Lord our God. I don't know, but they said, come. Many of them did. Come, let us go up. Let us go up to Zion. And the word Zion, by the way, what does the word Zion really mean? Mitsuyan. What does Mitsuyan mean? Excellent. It means you've hit the mark. Because ultimately, what is Zionism about? What is Judaism about? Judaism is about a system of ethical monotheism that we live, and we want to do our share to promulgate to the entire world. And those who really understand Zion see Israel as the place of excellence from which this can emerge. Now, whether it becomes that place of excellence requires a lot of work. You know, we're now in the days of the anniversary of the assassination of the Prime Minister of Israel. When something like that happens, we've moved away from the dream of Zion. We have to move towards the dream of Zion.
You
I love
put him
this
in jail, you
lesson.
give him a wife, and he has a
Right?
child.
So, Kumu v'na'ale
So
Zion. Let us rise and go on
Show
Aliyah.
the Prime
V'na'ale.
Minister.
The word Na'ale, what does it a play on? Aliyah. V'na'ale. We will go up to Zion. And you can be coming from South Africa, and you're going north. You could be coming from New York, and you're really going south. You're going on Aliyah. You're going
Olim
up.
l'kedusha.
Kumu v'na'ale Zion el Adonai Eloheinu.
So who's
This is his
listening
call.
to
We
him?
did 5 sentences tonight. This is Jeremiah's.
poetry.
This is Jeremiah's call to the people of the north
Oh, they
to
listen.
return. Let's see what happens. Let's see if Jeremiah succeeds. Say a few more minutes and then we'll break.
Didn't he foresee the coming exile?
At this point, he
He
lived
was a
different.
prophet?
He lived different stages of his life. At different time, he forecasted and said different things. At this point in his life, at the time of Yoshiyahu, he is the prophet of redemption. He also, at this point, is the prophet who very strongly rebukes the South, because while there had been a Reformation, he doesn't think that the Reformation is sincere. We'll look into that. We'll see that in chapter 2 of Jeremiah. Just a couple of more sentences and let's see what happens. Let's just read a little bit. Sure, of course.
Is that the same shorish as Chilul? Like
Yes.
Chilul Hashem?
Yes.
Because you're saying it's a good thing, I'm thinking it's a curse.
Well, like most things,
And
Daniel,
so,
most things, that which could be most negative could be turned into something very positive. Chilelu is that term, but it's also a term of redemption. Let's read a couple more sentences,
Also
and we'll
chesed
pick it up next week.
could be negative. It was once a toeva.
Let's see what he says here. Kicho, and I'm just going to read now. Kicho Amar Adonai. For thus says the Lord. What does the Lord say? Ranu liYaakov simcha. Cry out in joy for Jacob. And when you say Jacob, friends,
I mean, Israel.
Jacob really had a second name. His
Israel.
name was also Israel.
Israel.
Jacob reminds us when he flees his parents' home and he has this dream of the ladder in a place called Bet-El. Bet-El is the center of the north. When you say Jacob, that evokes the north. By the way, if you're interested, this Saturday night we're putting Jacob on trial. It should be a lot of fun. Mark Baker is the defense attorney. He's been trying to I've been giving him some free advice, I've not charged him. He's done enough pro bono work for me. Mark was my lawyer many times, and at one time he did the Getz trial, remember Getz?
Yeah,
Yeah.
great.
They were doing a profile on Mark, and I knew he was gonna get me into this New York profile, and I got my line. My line was, because they said about, they wanted to know his relationship with his rabbi, he said, if my rabbi was a paying customer, I can build half my practice around it. So, come this Saturday night, you will really enjoy it. They're the real prosecutor, and there's Judge Statmeyer, and as I understand, Mark told me last night, he is calling Rashi as a witness, and I think he's calling God as a witness, so this is getting, it's gonna be a lot of fun. And I'm happy, you know, we put David on trial, and we are the only Orthodox synagogue that found him guilty. The others either found him innocent or they were hung juries, they were afraid. But at the Bayit, it's fine, anything goes. Ki choam Adonai, that says the Lord, Ranu liYaakov simcha. Cry out in joy for Jacob, Vitzalu b'rosh hagoyim. Shout out at the crossroads of the nation. Hashmiu hallelujah in Rus, sing aloud in praise and say, Hosha Adonai et Amcha, so beautiful. Save, O Lord, your people, et Sherit Yisrael, the remnant of Israel. Look at this. Does this get more beautiful? When you read this, literally, it's so gorgeous. Here's the description of the return. Elohim meviotam me'eretz tzafon. Here it is clearly. Behold, God is speaking now. I will bring them from the northland. V'kibatztim v'yarkitei aretz. I will gather them from the end of the north. I love the next phrase. Bam, amongst them, Iver, the blind, Ufiseach, and the lame. Who's going to return? Only those who's in perfect shape? The state of Israel, it would have been whether they would have been a Shoah or not. And frankly, it was not worth a Shoah. But one has to be blind not to recognize that there's some connection between what happened then and the establishment of the state. Now, the Shoah was a place where, who are the ones who make it in the Third Reich? Only those who are perfect. If you're lame, you're gone. If you're blind, you're gone. Mengele tells you go to the other side. Who returns? Who goes on Aliyah? What's the test? Arise and come, and amongst you will be whom? The mentally challenged and the physically challenged. That's the test of a peoplehood. The test of a peoplehood, the test of community, as I've said ad nauseum over the years, is not the way we reach out our synagogue. We reach out to the powerful. But how do we reach out to the most vulnerable? This phrase is a phrase, I will bring them from the north. Tzafon. Tzafon is the north. By the way, Tzafon is also play on the word Tzafun. It's in the Seder. What does the Tzafun mean? Hidden. Hidden. Whenever you find Tzadik Peinon, hidden could be Nistar. But Tzafun is always a redemptive term. From the north, the redemption will come.
Sofnat Hameach.
Also, Sofnat Hameach, because that was Joseph, who was a redemptive leader. V'kibatztim miyarkitei aretz. I will gather them in from the ends of the earth. Bam iver uviseach. There'll be wheelchairs. All kinds of people will become. Hara v'yoledet yachdav. The pregnant will come. And those who give birth together. Kahal gadol. A great congregation. Yoshuvu ena. They'll return. Bivchi yavodu. Wow. They will return in tears. He just said, come back and we're going to be dancing with the timbrels, but he understands. Just went through exile. There's going to be a lot of tears. Maybe that's why we break the glass under the chuppah. It's the brokenness. There's the tears, and from the tears there's this expression of wedding and joy. Uvitachanonim uvileim. Uvitachnunim ovileim, and with supplication or with compassion, ovileim, I will guide them. I love this. Olichem, from Holach, I will lead them el nachalei mayim, to the streams of water. That's interesting. I will lead them to streams of water. Why this metaphor?
Because he said midbar before.
He said midbar, excellent. You're coming from the desert to the water.
Water is healing.
Water is healing.
Mayim chayim, it's life.
Water is life. Water, by the way, is love. Every romantic story in the Bible takes place at the water, at the well.
Well,
This week's portion. Isaac will find a wife where?
at
To Eliezer,
well.
at the well.
Right.
Jacob will see Rachel at the well. Moses will save Tzipporah at the water. Just like you need water to live, it's hard to live without love. Olichem onachle mayim b'derech yashar, in a straightforward way, lo yikoshu ba, where they will not stumble. Doesn't only mean a level road. Riverdale is not a level. Too many people are tripping over the
Yes.
cement, which sometimes one block is lifted up the
From
other.
the roots of the
But it
trees.
means, Derech Yasher means with Yosher. What does Yosher mean? It's my favorite sentence in the Torah. Vasita atov ve'ayasha b'nei Hashem. Do the good and that which is straight in the eyes of the Lord. Ki hayiti l'Yisrael la'av. Because I am forever the father to Israel, again to Israel, to the north. And look at this, ve'Ephraim b'chorihu. Who's Ephraim? From whom? The younger son, but the more important son of whom?
Joseph.
Of Joseph.
The Ben Yakili Ephraim.
Of
Isn't- do
Joseph.
we have that?
Of Joseph. Not of whom?
Judah.
Not of Judah. Not of Judah. Because the real battle was between Judah, who is his son. They're all children of Jacob, and he's the son who's his mother, Judah. Leah. He's the leader. It's Judah. And on the other side is Rachel, who's the leader. Joseph. And who's the most important from Joseph? Ephraim. So basically the breakdown of the kingdoms was Judah in the south, it's Judah, and who's in the north? It's sometimes called Malchut Ephraim. It's the same, you see that? It's the same conflict. In the Bible, in the book of Genesis, we're talking about the confrontation between Judah and Joseph. And it happens again in the time of the Bible. What happens? You have a conflict between the south, which is the kingdom of Judah, and the north, which is the kingdom of Ephraim. Now you would think, who is the eldest? The eldest should be whom? Should be Judah. What is God saying to assuage the north? Ephraim b'chorihi.
My firstborn.
My firstborn. I don't know if he's trying to say that Ephraim will trump Judah, but he's trying to say, you've got the same importance. You, Ephraim, you are important. By the way, this split, I spoke about the split before. When you think about it, there's a very serious split in Israel between, there are those who are so, they're just intent on annexing all of Judea and Samaria, but Judea and Samaria. And then there's the split, those who say no. It's a very interesting, my sister was a novelist, fiction writer, but a satirist who's Dr. who's has a very strong pen, and in writing circles she's known to be, I write, she's a brilliant writer. But she, in her book Master of the Return, I think it's a story about how it's fiction that the state of Israel decides that they're going to let Judea and Samaria alone. And so the Jews in Hebron decide that they're going to establish the kingdom of Judah. Can you imagine that battle going on? God forbid.
Well, right now they
God
say,
forbid.
some of the people are saying, you call yourself Israel, and if worse comes to worse, we'll call ourselves
Well,
Yehuda,
there was a
right? They say that.
kingdom of Judah.
Yeah, no doubt. No
Yeah.
doubt. So we're on our way. Next week we've got some even better stuff, because if you'll turn the page for a moment just to whet your appetite, because this gets very, very famous.
Coming attraction.
Sentence 15, coming attractions. Ko amar Adonai, thus says the Lord. Ko birama nishma, a cry is heard in Ramah. Rachel mivaka lo baneha. Rachel is crying for her children. Ve'ana lehinachem. She refuses to be comforted. Al baneha, concerning her children, ki einenu, for they are gone. And here's my coming attraction. Virtually everyone believes and thinks that who is Rachel crying about? Which children?
That she doesn't have children.
Well, Rachel has.
Her grandchildren.
Her grand.
Who is she crying about?
Ephraim.
Now that's my punchline. But what do people think?
All Jews.
Where is Rachel's tomb?
Bethlehem.
Bethlehem.
Not Bethlehem.
Bethlehem. Where's Bethlehem?
South.
Just south of Jerusalem. Why is she crying in Bethlehem?
That's where she
You know the
was
rabbinic legend? That when Judah was destroyed, the people marched out of Jerusalem and passed Rachel's tomb. And Rachel cries as they were exiled. That's the way it's normatively understood. So Kol B'Ramah, Ramah is understood to be right there in Bethlehem. But the truth is that's not what this text means. Ramah is not there. Ramah is further north. And who is Rachel crying about? Her own children. Who are her own children?
Joseph.
Not Judah, but the children of Joseph. It's this call for return, but we'll